Let's go back up to this input section. Oh, I guess I went through it pretty well. Output, here's input power to the DC power supply, ground, 120 volts neutral, 120 volts power, and then 24 volts on the output side here. The output of the 24 volts DC, the actually plus goes to this guy right here. This is the distribution point for the DC power, which would go into these toggle switches, and then also would go into down here at this point to supply DC power to the transmitters in the pump package. So if you take a look at the power, this is the DC power coming in these toggle switches. They just actually turn around and they come into a couple of points on the input here that say, hey, okay, we've turned on those toggle switches to the input of this microprocessor, and it looks at it and it does its magic and says, oh, let's send output signals to these solenoid valves, and then let's control this variable frequency drive, and then also let's monitor for alarms. So that's the DC power. The neutral to the DC power comes back to this terminal block here where there's a couple of minuses on there, the 2 in the middle. That's a neutral for the DC power, and actually one wire comes back out, just comes back into this neutral side of this the negative side of the 24 volts DC. This other one here, I talked about this before, this is the neutral to the 120 volts AC. If you take a look at there's a neutral here. This is the 120 volts into the transformer. It's got a plus and a neutral. The neutral actually comes back to this point right here. The controller itself, microcontroller, gets its power from 120 volts. Right here there's a black wire and a white wire and a green wire. That black wire, white wire go back to these points right here. So if you take a look at the output of these circuit breakers, that's where they go. This load side, one of them goes to this transformer, one of them goes to this solar power supply, and one of them goes to this micrologic controller. And that's not exactly how they go. Actually, one of these wires on the output of the 10 amps, the main one, comes back and loops around to the 2 amp on for the DC power supply. This is actually a 6 amp breaker in this one, and it's doing several things. It's powering this DC power supply, actually is powering this transformer, and it's coming down to this relay, and this relay actually is set up to power a plug to give it 120 volts out to do another purpose. So so that's how that goes. That about covers it. You can see there's a ground wire on the transformer, surge suppression unit. We could use some contacts off that surge suppression to tell whether it's bad or not and send it back into this controller. If the DC power supply was a larger one, sometimes there's some output contacts on the DC power supply to tell that it's current limiting or isn't working anymore. You could feed that back into the microcontroller to say that there's some problems. I think that's enough. That's a pretty detailed explanation of that pump package. That's it for now.